What is cultural heritage, and why is it an integral part of EF's values in action? Well, cultural heritage is basically comprised of the most important elements of any particular culture, as identified by the holders of that culture. Now, that last point is really important. We're not just talking about things like cathedrals or other elaborate buildings celebrated by bodies like UNESCO, but all the elements that express and uphold any culture that are deemed really important by the societies in question themselves. Before going into a little bit more detail about what constitutes cultural heritage, it's important to note that most safeguarding systems, which is what EF's values in action basically is, so most safeguarding systems of international organizations include some variation of a cultural heritage standard. And this is because cultural heritage is recognized as the most important identifying elements of a society. If you remember how Parisians felt when Notre Dame was burning, well, it's the same in all communities, but you can swap out Notre Dame with a special tree, or a burial ground, or a sacred landscape or place, or a particular cultural practice, like a specific hunting technique, or a fishing technique, or a very lifestyle that is, for instance, nomadic or otherwise mobile, different from the mainstream. And because cultural heritage is so diverse, organizations often find it quite difficult to grasp and therefore difficult to protect and put in measures to protect that cultural heritage. So for the intents and purposes of the thematic on cultural heritage in EF's safeguarding framework, we can think about it in 4 ways. The first is tangible cultural heritage, referring to material objects that can be movable or immovable, like property, sites, structures, buildings with historical, religious, aesthetic, or other cultural significance, or movable things like paintings, religious artifacts, written teachings, etc. The second is intangible heritage. This is always the difficult one to put our fingers on. Otherwise, it's known as living heritage, and it refers to knowledge, to language, to skills, to practices, to cultural life ways, to worldviews, folklore, artistic expression, and so on. The third type, if you like, of cultural heritage are natural elements with cultural significance that refer to unique natural features that embody important cultural or spiritual values, like landscapes. They can be huge landscapes or tiny sites, individual natural elements like a waterfall or a tree. Or they can be sacred species, for instance, or totemic species. And the fourth, which is bringing us right into the future, is digital cultural heritage, referring to technologically generated resources of enduring value that are either born digital, so made digitally, or digitized. And we can safely say that this one will be increasingly relevant in the future. So, 4 types of cultural heritage: tangible, intangible, or living, natural, and digital. And finally, a last important point to make about cultural heritage is in its links to cultural rights. So if we are basing this whole body of work in an effort to respect and enhance human rights in all that we do, it's important to note that all peoples have the right to their culture as a basic human right. And I quote the UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, who stated that cultural rights are an expression of and a prerequisite for human dignity. So this underlines our ultimate duty to understand what we're talking about here and make sure our activities do not undermine anyone's cultural heritage.